Hello, listeners, and welcome to the second season of the Adapt podcast, the podcast about how society adapts to the world's growing challenges. My name is Harish Murugesan, and I am a present freshman at The Ohio State University, and I major in computer science and engineering. Now, today I have the honor to be joined by Mr. Chris Martin. Mr. Martin is one of the most skilled communication managers at Honda, dealing with all technology and legal topics. Mr. Martin is a graduate from Oglethorpe University and then proceeded to get an MBA at the Mac Robinson School of Business. Ever since, he has put more than 30 years of helping develop Honda larger and larger. In fact, Honda recently has put forth a lot of efforts into a new technology, hydrogen fuel cells, and looking to expand it into the vehicle market soon and make a more renewable and clean planet. So thank you again, Mr. Martin, for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So one of the first things I like to start with all my guests is, firstly, kind of what was your steps to get to the place where you are, and essentially, what is your story?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned college. I actually started with Honda when I was in college. So I started. There was a program that actually still exists today, where you work in the parts distribution centers around the country. We have students that are in college and they work part-time. They have to maintain a certain grade point average, sort of like an internship, but not really an internship. And that's how I started with Honda, in Georgia, working in a parts center, just picking the parts that end up going to dealers, oil filters. And back in the day, we used to actually install air conditioners, full air conditioners. They used to be optional, believe it or not, on cars. So back then we would ship a bunch of air conditioners to dealers because in the South where we lived, everybody needed an air conditioner, believe it or not. They didn't come from the factory with air conditioners. But that was in the early 90s. And I utilized that experience and that access within Honda to, and the fact that I was in college and, learning a lot of new skills, to kind of parlay my way into a regular job at Honda. And moved forward and did customer service for Honda, working with our customers, and that ultimately ended up out in the field, working with our dealers and helping train service technicians and manage service departments and things like that. And then I moved into management in our larger customer service operation, which was in our headquarters in Torrance, California. Did that for several years, and then just by networking, I've met the head of the public relations group at Honda by networking in the office. And when a job opened up, he said, "I think you'd be good at this." And I gave it a shot. And that was, like 17 years ago, when I joined the public relations team, and then ultimately came to the position that I am now. So it's been an interesting journey. It's been tied mostly around our automobile products, but I also have a passion for our motorcycles and Honda makes a wide variety of things. We make lawnmowers. We make everything from little small mobility scooter called the Moto Compacto, all the way up to the Honda Jet. I think a lot of people are still surprised when I mention the Jet. They're like, "Honda makes an airplane?" Yes, we do make an airplane. We have a variety of different types of products, and those create opportunities for us, but they also create major challenges for us, especially as we're looking at global warming. If we look at our goal to reduce our carbon emissions, and we've stated a really aggressive goal by 2050, we want no carbon emissions from any of our products, from our products in operations. In other words, if they're out in the universe, we don't want them creating carbon from them. So we need to figure out how to charge carbon free all of our corporate activities, everything. And so you imagine a jet, it uses fuel, and it's hard to put a big battery in a jet. So anyway, there's a really holistic plan going on right now as we're aiming towards 2050 to get to a point where none of those products will have carbon emissions, and where we create a sort of circular economy for our products where we can recycle everything. So ultimately, the panacea goal is no carbon and no new mining out of the ground. Right now we're having to mine, for the batteries in our cars, we're having to mine metal. Certainly we use some recycled, but, the plastics and all the other things on the car, glass, tires, all of that sort of stuff. We're looking at ways to bring all of that stuff into a circular environment so that you can feel assured that when you buy a new car, your old car is not just going to a junk heap to be crushed and sit there. It's going to turn into the materials that would become a new car. So that's a really broad look at the broad company goal towards having no environmental impact. But we're talking about fuel cells today, and how does that fit into it? Fuel cells, essentially, they utilize hydrogen, which is the most plentiful element in the universe. We've been working on hydrogen fuel cell research since the 1990s, and we've had several iterations of actual fuel cell electric vehicles on the road since then. We were the first to actually have actual customers, leasing and driving cars. So far, it's only been here in the state of California, because that's where the hydrogen refueling infrastructure is. But hydrogen offers such promise because it is ultimately renewable. It provides, if you do it right, it provides largely the same experience as a gasoline powered car for the customer. You drive your car, performs the way you expect, and when you need to refuel, it takes like 5 minutes to refuel. Versus, battery electric vehicles, which we also make, they require some time to recharge. They have a lot more weight associated with it because the batteries and things like that. So we feel that fuel cell will ultimately make a bigger and bigger part of mobility and transportation moving forward. But we do have a plan for increasing the hydrogen economy, because right now it's not easy to find hydrogen. Especially where you live in Ohio. I don't know that there are any commercial hydrogen refueling stations. So we're often asked, well, why would I buy one of these things if I can't find anywhere to refuel it, right? So that's part of our current strategy, is to sort of grow the overall hydrogen economy. And I can lay out a plan for that later, but I've been talking a long time, so ask me the question.
No, you're good. I actually, one of the points you were talking about earlier on kind of making, just maybe even a car that someone might have used, instead of sending it to a junkyard, kind of the idea of recycling those materials, I think, is very unique. And it reminds me actually of an article I read a few days ago, actually dealing with your competitors, Toyota. And the article was stating that a lot of the nickel, cobalt coming from mining in Canada actually caused a lot more damage to the environment than it actually did when it came to the product. Now, the product was the Toyota Prius, and kind of that balance getting disrupted between the consequences of mining and the actual efficiency of the Prius, I think it's kind of an odd and kind of bad thing to think about, that companies aren't thinking about the productions that way. And I think that Honda's thinking about more of the infrastructure of hydrogen fuel cells even more. So I find that super interesting.
Yeah, it's really about trying to consider truly the full environmental impact of everything that we do, and it takes it's a painful pill to swallow when you look back, like you said, at your whole supply chain, all the way down to the raw materials and where they're coming from. I think you look at it as it currently exists. It's gotten a lot better than it was years ago, but it's got a long way to go. And, speaking of mining, for instance, a huge portion of mining is diesel equipment rolling around. They use large diesel dump trucks. They use bulldozers. Diesel is a major source of energy for mining, for construction, for a lot of those things. And, if you're working on a mine and you want to replace a diesel truck with something that has zero carbon emissions, zero particulate emissions, really your choices are limited. You could get a big battery, but if you're going to put it into a truck that already weighs 10 tons, and you're going to put a battery that can now move that truck, you suddenly increase the weight of that truck dramatically. Where it's driving around on surfaces, could sink into the area. You also have long recharge time. The bigger the battery, the longer the recharge time. So fuel cell is actually, that's one of the domains that we're looking at for our fuel cell technology, because essentially by powering the truck with hydrogen, it runs like an electric vehicle. It's just run on hydrogen. So you need a tank to fill with hydrogen. But that tank fills a lot faster than an EV battery would recharge. The overall vehicle could be much, much lighter than a similar amount of batteries needed to run the usage cycle of the mine. And it just offers some very unique benefits for an industrial type environment. So as we're looking holistically at how we're going to achieve that 2050 goal, providing alternate solutions for mining and for construction and for all those other things, help these other companies become carbon neutral as well. It is essential, essentially, to all of us reaching this goal of reducing the carbon impact on the planet. So that's one of the domains. I'll quickly run through some other ones. We basically identified 4 places where we could potentially use hydrogen fuel cells. One is fuel cell vehicles, which we have. We have a CRV fuel cell vehicle, which acts like a plug-in hybrid. It's really interesting. You can plug it in like an EV and get around 20 miles of range with that. But then if you want to go on longer trips, it's like a plug-in hybrid. The fuel cell will kick on and you'll start using hydrogen to run the car. So we got that, fuel cell electric vehicles. Another one is stationary backup. Because right now, if you think about all the data centers that are out there running all of this cloud services that exist, Amazon, Microsoft, all of these companies have huge data centers now that require a lot of energy to run. And if there's a power outage, they have large diesel generators sitting behind those facilities ready to kick on to help run those. So we see hydrogen fuel cells as a good potential replacement for those diesel generators so that they never have to emit carbon. Also, when they do come on, they're really loud and stinky, and the local communities do not appreciate it when they're running on their backup power because it's very disruptive, because a lot of these data centers are now being placed in rural areas away from homes, but they're quiet, serene places.
Yeah.
So that's 2. Construction equipment we sort of talked about a little bit, and then also is transportation, Class 8 trucks. So that's a really exciting area that we're delving into right now, which is, you consider all those, when you're driving down the freeway, all those big trucks that are rolling around, they're all running on diesel engines. They emit quite a bit of carbon, but they also emit a lot of particulate emissions, which we're still concerned with. So we're looking at trying to install fuel cells in the Class 8 trucks. We actually built a concept truck. If you go search online, you can find a video of it. And essentially, the same benefits I applied to mining equipment apply to big trucks too. You don't want to have the truck weigh so much that you reduce the ability to tow, a big load in your trailer, right? So by taking that battery weight out and converting to fuel cell, it offers some pretty unique advantages for trucking as well.
Totally. That's super cool. I think the advantages that can be trucking. And for the viewers watching at home, I'll put up kind of like the concept video that Mr. Martin was talking about of kind of Honda's development into hydrogen fuel cells. So going back to the fuel cell itself, I know you can't disclose very specific parts of it, but just for the viewers at home, could you give us a rough kind of idea of how a hydrogen fuel cell works?
Sure. So hydrogen doesn't like to exist by itself. That is one of the challenges of hydrogen, is that you have to, the way that hydrogen works is it wants to form a bond with another element, and then it becomes stable. So it's unstable by itself. So once you've got it separated and you've got it in a tank, if you just let it out into the air, it's going to go combine with other stuff in the air rather quickly, because it wants to. It wants to find oxygen. Is one of the things it likes to combine with. And what the fuel cell does to take its advantage of that that propensity, that need for hydrogen to bond to things. And essentially, you put hydrogen on one side of a membrane. It's a very advanced material. You mix it essentially by pushing it across this membrane, and you mix it with atmospheric oxygen. Essentially, just the air gets circulated through there from the outside, and there's oxygen in that air. And that is enough, basically, to create that bonding process. It's creating water at that point. But when it does that, it releases some energy. And that membrane is able to capture those electrons. That electrons are electricity. So it captures that electricity and then funnels it off for use. So you can use it to propel a vehicle. You can use it to power a house. You can use it for a variety of different purposes. So essentially, it's a way to make electricity. And the output from that is electricity, water, and heat. Those are the three things that come out of this chemical process. There's no emissions, there's no smoke, there's no carbon being emitted or anything like that. Carbon's not really involved at all in the process.
Yeah, I think that's a very efficient process to get energy, siphoning it off of that membrane. I think that's super cool. And it seems Honda has been implementing these to recent cars. In fact, it's been stated that Honda's 2025 CR-V will be one of the first, I think, hydrogen fuel cell EVs in America. So that's definitely super exciting.
Well, let me put it this way: it's the first one that has a plug-in electric function. So the fact is, we've had electric fuel cell vehicles on the road since the early 2000s. So it's not the first. So I'll correct you on that one. We've actually had several generations. The first one was a sort of a dumpy little 3-door hatchback looking vehicle called the SC. And then we introduced a more luxury car version called the FCX. And then we had the FCX Clarity. And then we had the Clarity, which was our last one before the current one. And now we've got the CR-V. So we've actually added a pretty good iteration of vehicles. Probably from your perspective, because you're in Ohio, you would have never seen them on the road because they've only really been in California for the most part, because that's where they could be refueled.
Yeah, we don't even see kind of like the hydrogen recharge stations either in Ohio. I've never even heard of seen them around.
So. Chicken and the egg scenario is, we as the auto manufacturers have invested heavily in trying to support the refueling infrastructure, because we need those if we're going to put the cars on the road, or customers have to have somewhere to refuel. But if you're going to open a hydrogen refueling station, you want some assurance from the automakers that they're going to give you customers, that they're going to give you cars. So it's like, which do you build first? The cars, but there's nowhere to refuel. The refueling stations, but there's no one to refuel there. And that nobody makes money. There's no economy there. So you sort of have to do both at the same time, which is sort of the model we followed for a long time. And frankly, it hasn't been that successful at growing hydrogen supplies across the country. So we've been limited to California. And that's why we think that the new strategy of focusing on construction equipment and mining equipment and other things like that has the potential to build demand for hydrogen at a greater level across the country. Because if you own a big mine, you could easily put a hydrogen refueling station in there and get hydrogen delivered, or create your own hydrogen on site, because it would be economical to do that for yourself at that site. Once you've done that, then there's demand for hydrogen in that region. Other people need more hydrogen. Ultimately, once there's enough production of hydrogen at an industrial level to meet the commercial demands, the big trucks and those sorts of things, that's when maybe later on in the future there would be easier transition to provide refueling for consumer vehicles. Gasoline's just so readily available. Diesel's so readily available. It's easy to throw a gas station out on the corner right now, but it's really hard to put a hydrogen station in. And you wouldn't do it if you're in Ohio, because you're not going to have anybody to refuel there, right, until people start selling cars there. But we think that in the future, if there's a readily available hydrogen across the country, because there's a demand for it, then we potentially will see actual hydrogen fuel cell vehicles for consumers being proliferated across the country as well. But it's a ways away. It's not going to happen.
So, Mr. Martin, what are some of the things that Honda is working on dealing with the hydrogen fuel cells?
It's interesting because we've been working on hydrogen fuel cells really for a long time before anybody knew what they were. I think, really since the late 90s, Linda started looking at hydrogen fuel cell as a really great replacement for internal combustion engines. The idea in the long run is that customer driving a hydrogen fuel cell car would get largely the same experience that you get from a petrol powered car, an internal combustion engine car. You drive your car, you go and you refuel in 5 minutes and you're on your way, right?
Yeah.
But with zero emissions. And back in the day when we first started working on this, it was less about carbon. Back then, it was more about clean air. So a lot of people who grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, especially in Southern California, the air quality was just terrible. If you came to LA certain days, it was a brown cloud across the city. And it was horrible. So Honda's efforts early on were really about clean air, about taking the particulate emissions out of the air and the NOx emissions and things like that. And so a lot of our motivation initially out developing hybrids and natural gas vehicles to a variety of different powertrains was really centered on clean air. But as time has moved on, as awareness about global warming became a bigger part of the discussion, fuel cells continue to be a promising technology for, eliminating carbon because essentially they're just using hydrogen, which is the most plentiful element in the universe as far as we know. The smallest element, it can be basically pulled away from other things in a variety of different ways. Obviously it's part of water. So our planet has a lot of water on the planet. So, depending on how you want to get the hydrogen, there are a variety of different ways to do it. It theoretically is an infinitely renewable resource, essentially.
Yeah, definitely. And we're all rooting for that worldwide change to happen soon. So sadly, we are running out of time, but often during the closing times of an episode, I always enjoy asking my guests a similar question in the end. And this is, what, in your opinion, is the next frontier of the world? In fact, just to give you an idea, the current frontiers of artificial intelligence and augmented reality are quite groundbreaking. But what do you feel will be that next frontier of innovation that helps the world adapt?
At its core, working for Honda, we're about mobility. We're a mobility company. We're currently the world's largest producer of internal combustion engines. And that's not necessarily a good thing to say these days, with carbon emissions being, such a bad concept. What we're doing right now is we're undergoing a fundamental, complete change in our business models. And that's requiring huge innovations to aim towards full electrification, fuel cell vehicles, no carbon, essentially by 2050. It's a big ask for a company that supplies transportation to people around the world, affordable transportation in third world countries, motorcycles, all of those sorts of things. So I think for our part, our contribution from Honda's side is going to be about figuring out what mobility looks like in the future and improving mobility access for everybody. One of the big things that's coming with AI and with the research that we're doing on vehicle automation is potentially the ability for people who've never been able to access independent mobility before, people who are blind, older people who can no longer drive, people with different disabilities, they can't take advantage to get out in the world and enjoy the world. We have a beautiful world, beautiful places to go. And so we want to be part of getting more people out and moving around because we think it's an essential part of life. So ultimately, we're hoping to bring more people out of their homes and get them moving around, but do it in an environmentally responsible way with no environmental impact.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, like you said, the world is a very beautiful place, and I think that's a very good goal for a company like Honda, who has such a big global reach to kind of help people come out and experience more in more accessible ways. So I think that's the perfect answer to help, I think, cherish what we have in the world even more and see how valuable what we have is. So on that note, again, thank you again, Mr. Martin, for joining us here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was fun.
And for the viewers at home, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this episode.